Middlemarch is an 1871 historical novel by the English writer George Eliot. Eliot, which was a pseudonym, her real name was Mary Ann Evans, was born in Warwickshire in 1809. Her father managed a landed estate, and when her formal education ended in her mid-teens, he gave her access to the estate library, allowing her to continue learning at her own pace. In 1846, she achieved minor fame after translating a book by a controversial German theologian into English. And in 1850, she moved to London with the intention of becoming a writer. There, she teamed up with a man who had published her a translation, and who made her the assistant editor of his newly purchased The Westminster Review. Among all her other achievements, she then wrote a series of novels to critical acclaim, of which Middlemarch is probably the greatest. Shortly before her death in 1880, at the age of just 61, she was universally and rightly considered Britain's most important living novelist. Middlemarch is subtitled A Study of Provincial Life, and Middlemarch is a fictionalised version of Coventry, where Eliot had lived for 8 years between 1841 and 1849. The novel itself is set 3 years before the 1832 Reform Bill, which extended voting rights throughout the country and abolished many long-standing electoral abuses. Its chief character is 19-year-old Dorothea Brooke, an idealistic, highly intelligent and practical young woman who makes a disastrous marriage to a pseudo-intellectual clergyman in his mid-40s. She then meets an attractive man of her own age, and to cap it all, that first marriage ends suddenly. The context of the Reform Bill is crucial. In many ways, it marked a watershed in 19th century Britain. It came at a time when everything was in flux. The Romantic movement had undermined Enlightenment orthodoxy. Industrialisation was well underway. The railways were expanding. The decline of religion had been accelerated by fossil evidence, the rise of biblical criticism, and the inexorable march of science. Eliot wants to examine all of that. Writing for an 1870s readership, one of our biggest questions is, how far have we come? The inexorable rise of science is represented by a young doctor called Tertius Lydgate, who comes to Middlemarch armed with the latest medical techniques, but is gradually compromised by his association with a corrupt banker, who he believes will provide the funds for a new hospital, the scepticism of the locals, and by another disastrous marriage, his own to a selfish young woman who sees him as a means to her own social advancement. Those are the two main stories in Middlemarch, but there are a host of subplots, some more prominent than others. In many ways, it resembles Leo Tolstoy's 1869 War and Peace, in that it attempts to put the whole of a particular society at a given time under the author's microscope. Although the social upheaval in Middlemarch isn't as profound as Tolstoy's, its themes, the roles of men and women, the value of the intellect, altruism, the unexpected costs of social advancement, are equally deep and well treated. Middlemarch also looks at the way people seem to be trapped by the historical era into which they're born. As the Kent University academic Doreen Roberts puts it in her introduction to the Wordsworth edition, both Dorothea Brooke and Tertius Lydgate can be seen as having been born out of their time. Dorothea too late for the age of faith, Lydgate too early for the age of science, and Dorothea is constrained by her sex and social class, rather as Lydgate is by his position as a gentleman. Both are social anomalies. When it was first published in serial form, the reviews of Middlemarch were mixed, but on the whole positive. Henry James described it as a treasure house of details, but an indifferent whole, which didn't stop him reproducing the story of Dorothea's calamitous marriage in his 1881 The Portrait of a Lady. Since then, its reputation has grown and grown. Virginia Woolf famously called it one of the few English novels written for grown-up people. If you haven't read it yet, it's well worth your time. And as a bonus, it has a happy ending.